Hey everybody, this is Melissa. This is Melissa with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab, and you're wondering, this is Ollie, who loves to be in these videos as well. So I've got an update for you. Some of you know that Parents Against SSFL is part of a CEQA lawsuit, CEQA, CEQA, and that's the California Environmental Quality Act, I believe. And we're in this lawsuit with PEER, which stands for Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, and also PSRLA, which stands for Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles. We're currently suing DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, and Boeing, which ironically is the only name that doesn't seem to have a really annoying acronym. Boeing and DTSC, you probably remember last year, broke long-standing cleanup agreements that had existed since 2007, that they would completely clean up the Santa Susana Field Lab to a residential with garden cleanup level. They rewrote the cleanup, they whacked the formulas, they rewrote the formulas, and they changed all the numbers. So they're claiming that they're going to do a garden residential. However, when you do the math and you consult our technical experts like Committee to Bridge the Gap, and this was actually also confirmed by Reuters, who did their own independent analysis. They found that 90 to 95% of the contaminated soil will now be left behind, where residential with garden cleanup standard would have removed almost all of the contamination. And if this is your first time learning about the Santa Susana Field Lab, it was used for decades as a rocket engine testing facility for NASA, Department of Energy, Boeing. Before Boeing, it was Rocketdyne. Before Department of Energy, it was Atomics Energy Commission. The site has been used for decades for nuclear power research and rocket engine research. It's massively contaminated, one of the most contaminated sites in California, and site of one of the worst nuclear meltdowns in American history, plus half a dozen or more other nuclear accidents that happened at the site. I live less than 2 miles, well, maybe a little more than 2 miles. I live downhill in the city of West Hills, which is part of Los Angeles. Jenny Knack, who I work with, isn't on the call right now. She's in Simi Valley, which is also downhill in the Ventura County side. So the site borders Ventura County and LA County. My daughter's a 2-time cancer survivor. That's how I found out about all this. Jenny was concerned when she moved into town and found out that her drinking water is actually contaminated with Santa Susana Field Lab from the Santa Susana Field Lab. Even though the drinking water company dilutes the water to make it safe, she's obviously really has vested interest in the site getting cleaned up, and as I do, because I don't want any more kids to suffer the way my daughter has. And there are dozens of kids in our community that I know personally. When I say dozens, I mean like 80 children who've had cancer, probably all because of the Santa Susana Field Lab. So back to this lawsuit. The cleanup agreement was breached. DTSC and Boeing called it a historic agreement. They ironically named it a settlement agreement. It is not. And they didn't bring it to the public for our review, which is what the CEQA law states, that the public and elected officials, we live here. We should have some say over how this cleanup goes. They did a backroom deal with Boeing, cut out all public information. So we're suing them, right? They did it wrong. Not only did they do a horrible cleanup agreement, they didn't even run it by us to see. Sorry, I'm just remembering something horrible they said during the press release. Director Meredith Williams said they did this agreement, the Boeing settlement agreement, on behalf of the mothers whose children have cancer and who are scared for their children's safety. They did not talk to us. Okay, so that was a year ago. That was 2022. And then, so that was when they put out the settlement agreement, I believe March 2022. And then I think it was the fall that the Memorandum of Understanding, that MOU with the Water Board, that activated it. So here we are. It's February 3rd today. And we are looking down the barrel of another lawsuit, also possibly another CEQA lawsuit. So there's this big document that the name itself is terrifying to me. It 5 years ago, which was when I was kind of just starting to figure out how I could help in all this mess. 5 years ago, they released something called the draft EIR. Now, an EIR is an environmental impact report, and it's kind of like the Bible of how the cleanup will go. It lists out for each of the responsible parties, and our site has three, which is unusual. We have NASA, Department of Energy, and Boeing. We have three responsible parties for the Santa Susana Field Lab, although Boeing owns the majority of the site. They're responsible for the majority of the cleanup. However, I will say that Department of Energy has most of the radioactive work site. And there was extensive radioactive work there. They even had a plutonium fuel facility, which is outrageous, especially considering it's less than 0 feet away from some homes in some parts of the Santa Susana Field Lab, like up in Bell Canyon. Literally, they share um, backyard gate with the Santa Susana Field Lab at a few homes there. So they were using plutonium, which has a 23,000 half-life, one of the most dangerous contaminants on Earth. If you breathe 1 millionth of an ounce, you're statistically 100% guaranteed to get lung cancer. 1 millionth of an ounce lung cancer. So it's super, super dangerous. And they had a plutonium fuel facility in the hills above Simi Valley, West Hills. We're only, 15 miles from downtown Los Angeles, super close to, granted, the population wasn't that big when they started it, but it was still here. And they haven't cleaned it up properly. Okay, back to my point that this PEIR was released as a draft 5 years ago. And when it was released as a draft, it said that Boeing was going to do a residential with cleanup for residential with garden, meaning if somebody hypothetically lived on site, they could actually grow a backyard garden, eat the produce that they grew, and not get cancer above that 1 in a million risk that the EPA has approved. That's a significant cleanup. That's taking almost all the contamination away, almost all of it. And the reason why that matters is, again, people live so close that even if nobody lives on the Santa Susana Field Lab, we already know that the contamination comes off site. We know that from the water runoff samples, whenever it rains, we see exceedances, which means that chemicals and radioactive waste are coming off the site into the local waterways. We know that through the Woolsey fire, we found radionuclides all the way up to Thousand Oaks, which was the limit of how much we could afford to test to. So I'm sure it went much further. So clearly the contamination gets off site. And that's why there's also a 60% higher cancer incidence rate. And that was a federally funded independent epidemiological study that found that for people living within 2 miles of the site, it is 60% higher cancer incidence rate compared to those living 5 miles outside of the site. Doesn't mean that people 5 miles outside the site are safe either. It just means they don't have a 60% higher cancer incidence rate. They might have a slightly lower cancer incidence rate. So the site is dangerous, and that's why we wanted that residential with garden cleanup from Boeing, which they had promised us back in 2007. That was in that draft EIR 5 years ago, right? But it also dealt with NASA and the Department of Energy. And NASA and Department of Energy signed a new agreement in 2010. We call it the AOC, Agreement on Consent, 2010 Cleanup Agreement. And this was a historical document. Most cleanups across the nation do not clean up to background. Okay, so background is if you have a radioactive site like we do, and the Department of Energy, which has radioactive sites across the nation. They have, I think, 11 active cleanup sites right now. Several of them are still being used. There's over 30,000 uranium pits still open in America from when we were digging out the uranium to make nuclear weapons. I mean, the whole department is a nightmare as far as environmental justice goes. So this AOC was like really radical, because if we get the AOC cleanup, that takes it to background. So there's naturally occurring radiation everywhere, right? If you have ever held up a Geiger counter to your granite countertop, it might go off. Everyone who has a fire detector in their house has the teeniest, tiniest amount of radioactivity in it. Didn't know if you knew that. Um, it's stupid small, but that's not naturally existing in a fire alarm now that I think about it. Nope, that wouldn't be naturally existing. Granite countertops, they have some naturally existing radiation sometimes. Radon is a gas that's radioactive. A lot of people back east have big problems. We have radon out here, but because people don't have basements, it doesn't really impact them very much. There's also naturally existing uranium out here. These things are not great for you, but the truth of the matter is, they're not when they're manipulated by humans. That's when they put the number behind them. Like it's not just cesium; it's cesium. I think it's 239 that we have here. It's not just uranium; it's uranium. Oh gosh, now I don't remember. Not just plutonium; it's plutonium 239. It means we've messed with it, and when we mess with it, we've made it exponentially more dangerous to humans. So the cleanup was pretty fair agreement. It said they didn't have to clean up the naturally existing radiation, right? They had to clean up anything that was not natural. This extra, they back at the Santa Susana Field Lab when they were doing all this radioactive work, which was totally top secret during the Cold War. They actually shipped in radioactive waste from across the nation. I don't know if you knew that. They shipped it in with these big trucks going up this really windy, crazy hill, and then they decladded it. And so there was a huge amount of the nation's radioactive waste was here for a while. And again, that's why this site is so contaminated because there were radioactive spills, there were radioactive fires, there were radioactive meltdowns. I mean, it's a lot of radioactive waste up here. Not nearly as much as Stanford. No, what am I thinking? Washington. Um, there's a lot of other Livermore labs. They have a lot. There's Georgia. Gosh, it's terrifying to think of what they have up there. So relatively small, but still a lot. And so this cleanup agreement was fair to say, anything that is not anything that is man-made, you clean up. You made the mess, you clean it up. Anything that is natural that was here before you did it, that can stay, right? Seems pretty fair. And that was called a background. So we're going down to the background existing natural radiation, a background cleanup, right? That's Department of Energy and NASA. They signed that agreement. And again, this is huge because not only does it clean up our site to be safe enough for the people living nearby, but now there's a new precedent set across the nation. The Department of Energy and NASA, who have more than just this site for environmental catastrophes that are putting Americans at risk daily because they live next to environmental justice sites like ours, contaminated sites. This new agreement, now they can say, well, hey, if they got a background cleanup, we want a background cleanup too. So that's huge. It's great. It was groundbreaking. That was 2010. It's now 2023. It has not started. That cleanup hasn't started. In fact, the cleanup from 2007 never started. They did some emergency actions, which, is great. Like things deemed so incredibly dangerous, like the radioactive burn pit where they used to burn radioactive waste in open air fires outdoors. That has been remediated, that area that got emergency action. But the majority of the site is still contaminated, right? Okay, so fast forward. Bet you didn't know you were getting a lecture out of this. Fast forward to today. We have the 2007 agreement with Boeing has now been broken. And we have the 2010 agreement about to be finalized, likely, in this PEIR, a programmatic environmental impact report. They probably should have named it problematic environmental impact report because that's what we're anticipating. NASA and Department of Energy have put out their own supplemental environmental impact statements. And in those, they said they would prefer to leave most of the contamination behind. They said, wouldn't that be more nice for them? Financially, less work for them. Then they wouldn't have to clean up any of their other sites to such a great cleanup. In fact, they'd like to leave 80 to 90% of the contaminated soil behind. That's what they've been saying for a couple of years now. But the draft that the community was able to sign on to, saying they still wanted that background cleanup, and the county of Los Angeles and the city of Los Angeles and the county of Ventura, all the supervisor boards, all of the state electorates, like the state senators, assembly people. We've had our federal Congress people and representatives, our senators, I mean, they all said we want these good cleanups, right? They've been saying that since 2007. And we are terrified that this PEIR, we've been told that it's going to be released in March, so just a few weeks from now, um, is going to have that horrible settlement agreement in it. It's going to say that Boeing can leave 90 to 95% of the contaminated soil behind. And it's very likely that NASA and the Department of Energy will get similar concessions. And that's going to be without public input. That's a really big deal. That's a really big deal. And it's been giving me nightmares. And I think maybe even PTSD. I don't know. I've been like super tired these last few days, crying, really irritable. And I think it's because I'm so stressed out that this PEIR is here. And as the way that they put it together, there's very little for us to do about it except go into a lawsuit. And you guys probably know lawsuits do not come free. We have to pay for them. Um, so there's a few actions that I have for you. Ready? Now that you have more background than you ever wanted to have. We've got a few things coming down the line. We've got this button letter, we call it. DTSC put out a survey recently asking us how we would like the cleanup to happen. Literally last week. The settlement agreement happened almost a year ago, and this PEIR is being released in 3 weeks. So having a survey for public response now is stupid, to say the least, completely ineffectual. But now they'll be able to go back to their boss and say, oh, yeah, we did community outreach. So we want you to fill that out, obviously, with things like health impacts being your highest concern and complete cleanup standards and, traffic on the site should probably be last because that's it, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. It's crazy to talk about traffic causing more problems than radioactive waste. It's on the survey. Please make sure you mark it as your least concern. And then we also have this button letter because they didn't give us any space to have any other comments besides what they decided we should comment on. So we have this extra button letter that will let you send a nice, angry little snippet to DTSC saying like, this is worthless. Like, why are you even wasting our time with a survey before you come out with a final and the settlement agreement already happened, right? It's just so that way they can tell their superiors that they did community outreach and it's total BS. Another thing that's coming out is we have some postcards, and it's really important because the county of Ventura, the city and county of Los Angeles have already passed resolutions that if the DTSC breaks these cleanup commitments, that the counties and city will sue on our behalf, and that is fantastic. That is what we need because they've got enough manpower and muscle power to do a good lawsuit, especially over the PEIR. So this postcard is just a little reminder, hey, I'm concerned about it. So you can order those. They're free. I mean, we'll just mail them to you, but you can just let us know if you want some. They have to get out really fast, and we need help distributing them to the community. But it's important that our supervisors remember that this is, a top concern for us, or they might not act. And we'll only have 30 days, potentially 30 days after the PER comes out to sue. And then lastly, my brain is just fried. It's been a long couple of days over here. We are still fundraising for that first CEQA lawsuit. Our goal is $25,000 potentially for our legal effort fund. Again, that's kind of blurry about how that's going to be, if that number is concrete or not, but that's kind of our goal right now. This second lawsuit would be taken up hopefully by NRDC and the counties and the cities. So that may or may not need fundraising from us. We're not really sure yet. First, we have a call with NRDC scheduled next week, and we've got some details that have to work themselves out once the PEIR is actually released. But all that to say, this has been 20 minutes. If any of you have watched this far, Congratulations. I wish I had a real gold sticker I would give you because I know these are long. I know that they're hard. I know that they're sometimes even depressing, but we're not depressed and we're not giving up. We are young and scrappy, like our country, to borrow a line from Hamlin, that is a great musical that I got to see on Broadway for the Emmys when I was in New York. That was just amazing. So we're young and scrappy. We've got this. We're not giving up. We're not going anywhere. And we're certainly not going to let go because our kids are at risk. Their health and safety is important. And this isn't just going to affect our kids, it's going to affect generations of children because this type of contamination it doesn't go away even in 5 generations. Some of these forever chemicals that we're learning about that are at the site, some of the radioactive contamination, this stuff doesn't go away. We need to protect our community. We need to protect our water. We need to protect the wildlife. We need to protect our kids. So, for all those things, I hope that you will take some action. Look for those postcards. Look for that survey. We'll have links here for you, and reach out with any questions you have. And we could just use every now and then a nice little note that says, "Don't give up," because there are days already that it's just, I mean, it's overwhelming. It's a lot, but we're going to get through it together. Okay, team? All right. Thanks. Bye. Oh, he's been napping this whole time. That's what dogs do well.